candlelight in the snowy garret. The watchers love the light on a snowy night from now on. When I come to the garret, we will light but one candle, enough to see your face and no more. The snow came suddenly in the hour of the bore 9:11 p.m. At first, it was only scattered flakes softly rustling against the garret boards. Then it grew thick, turning to a heavy downpour, carried by the cold wind, hitting the door like a gentle knock. Even wrapped in the thin blanket Samuel had left, I was chilled to the bone, my fingers too stiff to turn the pages of my mother's herbal manual. The candle had burned halfway down, wax trailing like meandering tears. I rested the manual on my lap, staring at a drawing of a sprig of mint. Beside it, Mother's delicate script read, "Boiled into a soup on a winter night, it drives out the cold." The ink was faded, slightly smudged from when she wrote it. I wondered if my mother, on a snowy night in the Northlands, had ever wrapped herself in a blanket like this, brewing hot soup while waiting for someone in need of her herbs. Creak, the garret door was suddenly pushed open. A blast of cold wind and snow rushed in. I instinctively retreated further into the blanket, looking up to see Samuel standing in the doorway. His black cloak was dusted with snow, and a tuft of unmelted flakes clung to the brim of his hood. The war scar on his left cheek was a pale line in the dim candlelight. He paused at the threshold, brushing the snow from his cloak, the motion soft, as if afraid to startle something. The flakes fell to the floor, quickly melting into small puddles. "Cold?" he asked, his voice lower than usual, carrying the crispness of the snowy night. Without waiting for my answer, he stepped in, carrying a thick woolen blanket, deep gray, its edges embroidered with fine silver thread. It was clearly one of his own. As he handed it to me, my fingers brushed his icy cold. He must have been standing in the snow for a long time. "The steward said the garret window leaks, and you keep waking up cold at night," he explained, his gaze sweeping over the herbal manual on my lap. His eyes softened on the drawing of the mint. "Your mother also loved to brew mint soup on snowy nights. She said it warms the body and clears the mind." I was startled. Before I could speak, he produced a pewter flask from behind him. Steam still rose from the vessel, and a faint green scent of mint escaped the lid, exactly like the soup my mother used to brew. "The steward brewed it, following your mother's recipe, with a touch of honey." He placed the flask on the small table before me. As he opened the lid, the warm steam blurred his face. "Drink it hot, do not let the cold settle in." I picked up the wooden spoon and tasted the soup. The warm liquid slid down my throat, carrying the faint bitterness of mint and the sweetness of honey. My eyes instantly pricked with warmth. It tasted exactly like my mother's, the sweetness precise. How did you know her recipe?" I asked, my voice trembling, the spoon shaking in my hand. "In the Northlands, the snow fell heavier than this." He sat on the chair opposite me, the candlelight catching his eyes, reflecting the dancing flame. My old wound flared up, and I couldn't sleep. "Your mother brewed this soup for me. She said, when the soup is warm, the pain will not ache so much. She also said the recipe was passed down from her mother, brewed only for those worth saving." "Worth saving." I repeated the phrase, looking down at the mint leaves in the flask. My throat tightened. My mother had spent her life saving others, only to be branded a witch and burned alive. Now, her recipe remained, and the man she saved was protecting her daughter. Samuel said nothing more, only watching me drink, his eyes softened, devoid of their usual sternness. When I finished the last sip, I started to hand the flask back, but noticed the bandage on his shoulder was loose. He must have walked too quickly through the snow. The edge of the bandage had slipped, revealing a hint of the dark red wound. "Your bandage is loose," I said without thinking, reaching out to touch it, then quickly retracting my hand. We were too close enough that I could see the unmelted snowflakes on his cloak and smell the mix of snow and leather on him. This proximity was too dangerous, too forbidden. He seemed oblivious to my hesitation, tugging at the loose bandage with a look of slight annoyance. The wind caught it coming over. I paid no mind. I bit my lip, then stood up, taking clean cotton and the salve from my herb satchel freshly mixed this afternoon, still fragrant with mint. I will wrap it again for you. My voice was soft, carrying a tension I hadn't realized. Otherwise, the wound will freeze and the pain will return. He did not refuse, only turning slightly to give me better access to his shoulder. I knelt before him, carefully unwrapping the old bandage. The dark red wound was exposed, looking better than this afternoon, but still unsettling. I dipped the salve and lightly applied it around the wound. My fingertip accidentally brushed his skin. His body suddenly stiffened, and I, too, felt a jolt, my finger instantly numb. The candlelight wavered, casting our shadows on the wall. My shadow knelt within his, as if firmly protected by him. I slowly wrapped the bandage, my gaze inevitably rising. He was staring into my eyes. His deep brown pupils held only my reflection, stripped of their usual authority, possessing a gentle warmth that unsettled me, like a candle flame on a snowy night. As I tied the bandage and prepared to withdraw my hand, he suddenly raised his own, his thumb gently wiping the corner of my mouth where a spot of soup remained. His motion was feather-light, the calluses of his thumb grazing my skin. I was paralyzed, watching him motionlessly. His eyes changed, moving from gentle to something deeper. His throat moved slightly, as if he meant to speak, but he retracted his hand, instead brushing a stray lock of hair from my forehead. His voice was a low whisper, "Soup stain." My cheeks instantly flushed. I quickly lowered my head, unable to meet his gaze. The garret was terribly quiet, broken only by the sound of snow hitting the wood and the sizzle of the candle, and the frantic drumming of my own heart, which pounded against my eardrums. Just then, a dark shadow flashed past the window. It was swift, but I caught it. It was a figure in red Templar vestments, hugging the garret wall and moving away, holding something reflective, like a spyglass. "Do not move." Samuel suddenly pressed his hand on my shoulder, his voice instantly cold. He blew out the candle. The garret plunged into darkness, only the snow light filtering through the gaps to define his silhouette. He leaned close to my ear, his warm breath on my neck, tense. Silence. "It is Valen's spy, watching." I quickly covered my mouth, not daring to make a sound. I could hear the footsteps outside fading, yet I dared not relax. The spy had seen us in the garret, seen the candlelight. If Valen knew, he would find another excuse to seize me. Samuel did not immediately relight the candle. He maintained his protective posture, waiting a long moment before whispering, "Gone." He relit the candle. The warm yellow light returned, no longer gentle, but wary. Spies love the light on a snowy night, because it betrays those within. He stood, adjusting his cloak, and looked at me, a hint of apology in his eyes. "I cannot stay tonight. The spy will surely report back. Lock the door. Tell the steward if you need anything. I will see you tomorrow." I nodded, watching him walk toward the door. I suddenly remembered something and called out, "Samuel." He turned to look at me, the candlelight softening the scar on his left cheek. "What is it?" Be careful on your way back," I whispered, my heart rate spiking again. He paused, then smiled the first time I had ever seen him smile. It was slight, yet incredibly gentle, like sunshine on snow. "I will," he said. "From now on, when I come to the garret, we will light but one candle, enough to see your face and no more. That way, the watchers will see nothing." The door closed softly. I was alone again. I touched the corner of my mouth where he had wiped the stain, still feeling the warmth of his fingertip. My heart felt full, both aching and sweet. The snow continued to fall, but I no longer felt the cold. Even the garret wind seemed gentle. However, Valen's spy had seen us. What would he report? Would Valen devise a new plan to seize me? I looked at the flask on the table and the blanket on my shoulder. I suddenly felt that no matter the danger, as long as Samuel was here, I didn't have to be afraid. The deputy's doubt and compromise. I help you because of the Duke, not because of you, but if your herbs can truly heal him, do not disappoint me. It was the hour of the dragon, 7:09 a.m. in late winter. The stone slabs of the training ground were still coated with a thin layer of frost that crunched beneath my steps like crushed ice. Wrapped in the thick wool blanket Samuel left, I still felt the cold penetrating my bones. Sleepless after the spy incident, I wanted to check the garden for the mint my mother once planted. I hadn't gone far before a sturdy figure blocked my path. It was Cain. He was in full silver armor, his shoulder plates still dusted with frost. He held a sheathed sword, standing stiffly as a pike. Seeing me, his brow immediately furrowed, his vigilance sharper than ever. Yet, instead of walking past as usual, he stepped forward, blocking the path to the garden. Miss Alara, his voice was the crisp tone of a military man, laced with the morning chill. You should not be here. He nodded toward the center of the training ground, where several soldiers in black uniforms were gathered, whispering amongst themselves. The spy saw the Duke enter your garret last night. Now the whole keep is whispering that you used dark arts to bewitch the Duke, making him ignore the pressure from the church. My heart plummeted. The herb satchel in my hand nearly fell. The spy hadn't just seen the candlelight, he had seen Samuel entering the garret. The soldiers' gossip was surely planted by Valen's men, meant to sow discord between Samuel and his troops. I did not. I began to explain, but the words failed me. My proximity to Samuel had indeed gone beyond simple patron and sheltered, and to outsiders, it truly looked like dark enchantment. Cain did not let me finish. He turned and pointed toward the center of the training ground. See for yourself. I followed his gaze, watching the soldiers part, revealing Samuel in the center. He wore no armor, only a black tunic. The bandage on his left shoulder stood out starkly in the morning light. He held a long sword, its tip resting on the ground, the frost on the blade gleaming cold. My Lord Duke, the church has sent pressure. They say if you continue to shelter the witch, they will petition the king to revoke your command. A tall soldier stepped forward, his voice heavy with discontent. We have fought under your banner for years, not to follow you in defying the church, only to lose our titles. Other soldiers chimed in, their voices sharp like needles piercing my ears. That's right, my lord. She's just a witch, surrender her. Valen's men are watching outside. If this continues, none of us can even leave the keep gate. Samuel said nothing, only tightening his grip on the sword, his knuckles turning white. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over the soldiers, the coldness in his eyes chillier than the morning frost. The noise instantly ceased. Only the clanging of the wind against the armor remained. Let any man dare call her a witch again, he suddenly raised his hand, plunging the long sword into the ground. The blade sank half an inch into the stone slab, making the surrounding frost particles jump. He must first best my sword. His voice was low but carried absolute authority. The war scar on his left cheek was cold in the morning light. The woman I, Samuel, protect is not for you to question. My decisions are not for the church to dictate. The soldiers were stunned by his presence. No one dared to speak again. They lowered their heads. Even the tallest soldier, who had voiced the most complaint, backed away, unable to meet Samuel's gaze. I stood still, watching Samuel's back. His shoulders were broad, the tunic outlining his lean musculature. Despite his old wound, he stood like an unshakable wall, blocking all doubt and discontent, shielding me behind him. Tears sprang to my eyes. I quickly wiped them away, afraid Cain would notice. To protect me, he was willing to argue with his own soldiers, risk losing his command, and stand against the entire church. I had worried he acted only out of old debt, but now I understood his protection went far beyond a simple debt of gratitude. Do not stand there gawking. Kane's voice suddenly rang in my ear. He was beside me, holding a small cloth bag, still stained with earth. Come with me, do not let the Duke see. He pulled me quickly toward the edge of the training ground, toward the bushes, his grip firm. Behind the bushes was a small, cleared area, with signs of freshly turned earth. Kane knelt and opened the cloth bag. Inside was a pile of deep green seeds, exactly like the mint seeds I knew. These are the mint seeds your mother once planted in the keep's garden. His voice was low, his eyes glancing toward Samuel in the distance. I found them in the garden yesterday. I was going to discard them, but... He stopped, pushing the bag into my hand. Hide this. Do not let the Duke know I helped you. I help you because of the Duke, not because you are a herbalist. I gripped the cloth bag. The rough texture of the seeds pressed through the cloth, carrying the earthy smell of soil and life. Kane, who had always been so wary of me, had secretly kept my mother's seeds. He claimed it was for the Duke, but I knew in his heart, he was beginning to believe I was not the witch Valen claimed. Thank you, Kane, I whispered, my voice filled with gratitude. He did not reply, only standing up, glancing at Samuel, and then turning back to me. Do not disappoint me if your herbs truly heal the Duke's old wound. I will treat everything I've heard before as unsaid. With that, he turned and walked away, the clanging of his armor fading. Just as I was about to put the bag into my herb satchel, I felt a warm cloak settle on my shoulders. I turned to see Samuel standing behind me, still holding the long sword. The frost on the blade had melted, leaving faint water lines. The coldness he showed the soldiers was gone, replaced by a tenderness, like the morning sun through the mist, warming my heart. What did Kane tell you? He asked, a hint of curiosity in his voice. He did not press, instead reaching out to adjust the collar of the cloak on my shoulder. It is cold this morning. Do not stay out too long. If you catch a chill, who will mix my salve? I looked into his eyes. His deep brown pupils reflected my image, the surrounding bushes, and the morning frost. A warmth spread through me. I am fine, I said, clutching the cloth bag. I just wanted to look for some mint seeds, so I can plant my own later. He smiled. It was the first time he had smiled at me. It was slight, yet incredibly gentle, like sunshine on snow. He reached out and lightly stroked my hair, as if touching a fragile treasure. Tell me if you want seeds. The keep's garden is empty. You can plant whatever you wish. He turned and called out to Kane, who was standing not far away. Kane. Watch over Alara's safety closely from now on. Do not let her wander the keep alone. Kane replied from a distance, his voice no longer holding discontent, but compliance. I stood close to Samuel, wrapped in his cloak, feeling his warmth. Suddenly, the soldiers' gossip and Valen's pressure no longer seemed so terrifying. As long as he was here, and with Kane's help, I felt I could safeguard my mother's herbal arts and prove I was no witch. Yet, Valen would not relent, and the soldiers' dissatisfaction would not easily fade. I looked at the seeds in my hand, recalling my mother's words: herbs must be planted slowly, and trust must be earned slowly. Perhaps, I needed time with Samuel, with Kane, and with the people in this keep to truly shed suspicion and stand together. Would you like me to analyze whether Kane has completely trusted Alara and if the soldiers' discontent will be utilized by Valen to create new conflict?